I mean, you can say, would you like to make more money? Would you like to pay less tax? I mean, how do you get them to start to dialogue? They don't perceive themselves as having a problem. They don't know that these things exist.
Right. So to answer that question, we're actually going to talk about that in a little more detail, because I never talk about captives. I never talk about solutions early on in the stage. The only way they'd ever come up is they're going to come up a little later. So what I do is I prepare well for a meeting. So I find a prospect, and the first thing I need to do is find, and we're going to cover this in a little detail, a valid business reason for the meeting. And a valid business reason. So around my organization and interactions with Miller Heiman and so forth, whenever we set up a meeting, we say, what's the valid business reason for the meeting? And if we can't articulate a valid business reason that is meaningful to the client, then we probably shouldn't have the meeting. And I'm going to get into detail on how you form a valid business reason. So I'm going to be talking all about, in those early meetings, to answer your question, the concept of what they're trying to do. So I'll give you an example. One of the seminar guys that we were working with went onto my LinkedIn, and he saw that I had a contact with a guy that ran a pretty good sized regional bank up in Ohio. And he says, I noticed that you're linked with this person. How do you know them? I go, I went through the Harvard Business School program with him, and we grew up in YPO together, so I know him pretty well. He said, would you have any objections of making an introduction for me to that bank? And I go, no, not at all. What's your valid business reason? So he said, I actually looked at all of their public information, and they have a capacity to buy $30 million of BOLI, and they've never bought BOLI before. They don't own any BOLI. And I go, really? That's a valid business reason? You think I'm going to call the guy on the phone and I'm going to be the first guy? You don't think he's got a phone call on this subject before? I mean, that's something he already knows. There's some reason why he hasn't purchased BOLI in the past. I know, but it can actually improve his earnings by X millions of dollars a year, and that's the valid business reason. It can actually boost their earnings by like $2 million a year. I go, that's still not a valid business reason. Do you think if I called the bank president, said, I'm going to be in Cincinnati, next week, can I stop by and talk to you about an idea to improve your bottom line by $2 million based in and around the purchase of bank-owned life insurance? He's going to say, we already went through this process, we're not interested, or whatever, the product or whatever, even they're not going to hold it. Or if I just said to him, without telling him what I wanted to meet with him, I want to meet you next week and have lunch. Can we get together for an hour lunch? He'd probably put me on his calendar, but guess what happens that morning? When he looks at my calendar, when he looks at his calendar, he says, oh shit, I've got a meeting with Bill this afternoon for lunch. Can you call him and tell him I'm running behind and I've got called into another meeting and I'm not going to be able to make lunch today because we don't have a valid business reason. So I said to this individual, as I preach in my book Merge, go do some research. Find something that can produce results and a personal win for this individual. And to his credit, we came back and a little bit of work. He said, well, I noticed in the whole compensation structure, they reward all of their executives with restricted stock and restricted stock units. I go, great. Pull out that information, figure out how many grants of stock this person has, when they're going to vest, and let's make an assumption of what the taxes would be. We find it. He says he's going to pay $200,000 in taxes in the fourth quarter when he vests on his options that had been granted a few years ago. I said, perfect. So I call the guy up and I go, hey, Fred, Bill McDonald, we haven't talked in a while. Look, I've done a little research on your bank, and I noticed that you are rewarding your executives with restricted stock units, which many of our clients do. I noticed also in the fourth quarter, you've got a tax liability of about $200,000. Would you be interested in getting together next week for about an hour to talk about ways you can defer the taxes on those gains and still own the shares outright? No, I just want to pay the taxes in the fourth quarter, right? He's going to give, whether he does it or not, he's going to give me the time because that's a valid business reason. So you've got to do your homework in advance to figure out how can I find a valid business reason? And we're going to spend a little more time on this piece.